there's a big topic that I do want to talk about, and that is tuning and temperaments. I love to ask harpsichordists and early music experts on this. Um, so I just every time that comes about, there's always like equal temperament. But but I know that. Can you explain to me like some of the tunings that are used, and is that something you were very familiar with? Like, are you so used to using interesting temperaments? Because I know it's not uniform. Even at that time, people use different temperaments, right? And
Yeah.
different tunings. So, can you maybe unpack your perspective on temperaments and tuning?
So actually, the whole development, which took time in Bach's time, can be summed up very fast. There was mean tone, where some chosen thirds were totally pure, and others are impossible to use. And actually, this doesn't allow to play many keys, but those which are playable are just perfect, at least in the perspective of the third. The fifth is very small, but this was not seen as a problem. Then, of course, it's the thirds which don't work at all were a huge problem. So people were looking for other possibilities. Actually, one of the first alternatives to be proposed was, of course, equal temperament, because it's very easy to explain. Every interval the same.
Mm.
It would solve all the problems, but people didn't necessarily like it. So, but it was an option from the beginning on. So already
So it
in,
actually has a history. It's not a very.
yeah,
It extends back. People have
yeah,
used it even a while back then.
yeah, in 16th century it was already described, but it was not the standard. And then temperaments were actually just um, trying to get away from mean tone to something which is comes closer to equal temperament to some degree, which could vary a lot.
Mm.
And in Bach's time, and already in the 17th century, many experiments existed, and actually the perfect thirds and the dissonance, which are very dissonant, for instance, uh, um, diminished fourth in mean tone. A C sharp is really a C sharp. It's not just the black key, which is between the C and the D, which would be a D flat. So actually, the
That's what I
interval,
think. Yeah, I guess it is. There's a different
yeah,
sound to it. There's a unique
yeah,
sound, right?
exactly. The C sharp to the F is supposed to be an ugly interval in mean tone. So
Mm.
actually, a lot of 17th century composers used a lot of augmented chords, which include necessarily a diminished fourth or an augmented fifth somewhere. And those dissonants sound much more expressive in mean tone.
Much more
So
striking. Now, what is your harpsichord tuned to right now?
now it's a kind of um, unequal temperament, which comes relatively close to equal temperament. So it's
Okay,
not a good place to show
to
it now.
demonstrate some
But if
striking
you
dissonances.
have, yeah, unfortunately, I can't now. Um,
But could you give some examples? So
yeah,
you
those
mentioned
dissonant.
certain intervals. So like, what keys would people use for some of these to demonstrate some of these interesting kind of dissonances?
Actually, there were good notes which were tuned according what one expects to be useful. For instance, a C sharp is more useful than a D flat, so you should tune C sharp. G sharp in 17th century was considered more useful than A flat, so you would tune G sharp. So you should just not use the G sharp as the A flat, because that's a real mistake. Um, then the dissonances which you create with the keys, which are still right, for instance, the augmented fourth, for instance, those are supposed to be to sound wrong. For instance, if you play a C sharp and a F, it will not be a beautiful third at all. And this is supposed to be like that.
Oh.
So actually, you could even play in A major if there is never a D sharp, for instance, because it's in the good keys. This is something which got a bit lost with Equal Temperament, and I'm. If the music is older, I'm more aware of it, of course, as if it's later music. Bach also, outside of his 24 Prelude and Fugue, he could write a piece in F minor, which is also already a very far, strange key. So of course one has to tune the keyboard in a way which comes closer to Equal Temperament. And I think that the composition techniques of Bach are in a way that this makes already less of a compositional difference. If I play 17th century music, I'm very sad with those more modern temperaments. It has a strong influence on my playing and also on my improvisations. It will also give me naturally the wish to improvise in a more old-fashioned style if the keyboard is perfect mean tone.
Right. And I think that's what Professor DeFries said, I think, in our interview. He said something like the instrument gives you ideas, right?
Absolutely. And he is totally right. He is playing a lot on original historical organs. I think for an early musician, it's also important to look for the originals, not only playing on copies, because they have a lot to say as well, those original instruments. And it's absolutely right. The instrument tells a lot. It has been built and designed for a certain taste, which is and to a different, very special tradition, and to get into the style really of the tradition is. It's really useful to play on the.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a ton of sense. So basically, if I take a 17th century keyboard piece and I go to my digital keyboard, which is Equal Temperament, I've kind of lost a lot of the sound,
Yeah.
and I've lost a lot of the things in translation because they compose with the temperaments in mind. And never mind that it's not even a real instrument. It's like the tuning, the fact that it's equal, just like it's like strips away a lot of the character.
Yes.
That makes
a lot of the expression which is in the music get lost.
Right.
Other things which you could use to put expression into music will not work if you do it on the historical instrument. For instance, diminished chords sound often very strange on mean tone temperament. So, and that's maybe a reason why in 17th century there are quite few diminished chords if you compare it to the next generations.
Right. That makes a ton of sense. Now, this is okay. Obviously, this is blasphemy. But if I said to an early musician, what if I had an electronic keyboard that, with a press of a button, gives you a different temperament sampled? Would that be heresy, or would that is that like you would rather not do that?
I would say it would even solve all the problems of temperaments, but I would still be very unhappy because all those instruments have so many more characteristics than the temperament. The sound, for instance, some harpsichords have a sound which is very long and disappearing more slowly. Some are more crispy and disappearing fast, for instance. And this, you could imitate it with an electronic keyboard, which makes everything you want by pressing the button. But it's much more complex because it's also about the acoustic of the room, which react to the instrument. So it's incredibly complex.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I understand. I understand.